He told her he was stuck in a 3-day legal conference in Ottawa. He said it in the measured, unhurried voice she had trusted for 11 years. The voice he used in depositions. The voice that made opposing counsel second-guess themselves. The voice that had once made her feel like the safest woman in any room. He said it while standing 40 feet below her on the lower level of the Rideau Center, his hand resting on the small of another woman's back, the two of them leaning over a display case at a jewelry store, with the easy, unhurried posture of people who had nowhere to be and no one to answer to. His wife was on the escalator above him. She had come to pick up a birthday gift for her mother. She had not planned to stop at this particular entrance. She had not planned any of this. Her name was Vivienne. No, wait. Her name was Hazel Drummond. And Hazel Drummond had spent 11 years believing she understood the precise dimensions of her own life. She was wrong about that, but she had been wrong in a very specific way. The way a person is wrong when they have been carefully, deliberately kept from the information that would have made them right. Part 1. The architecture of Enough. Hazel Drummond grew up in a house in Sudbury where enough was a word used with reverence. Enough heat in January. Enough groceries on Friday. Enough time before the landlord called again. Her mother, Doris, worked the night shift at a packaging facility for 19 years and called it steady work with the pride of someone who had learned early that steady was its own kind of gift. Hazel watched her mother and took notes in the way children do. Not consciously, not with intention, but with the marrow-deep attention of someone whose survival depended on understanding how things actually worked underneath the performance of how they were supposed to work. She was good at reading people. She had been good at it since she was 7 years old and could tell, from the way her mother set her coffee cup down, whether the night had been hard or manageable. She cataloged expressions. She tracked inconsistencies. She filed things away with the instinctive precision of someone who had learned that adults did not always tell the truth, even when they believed they were. She studied accounting at Laurentian, not because it was her passion. She had no illusions about passion, but because numbers did not lie the way people did. And she found that comforting. She articled at a mid-sized firm in Sudbury, then moved to Ottawa at 26 for a position with a private equity firm that managed infrastructure assets across Northern Ontario. Within 4 years, she was a senior analyst. Within 7, she was running a portfolio worth $340 million for clients who sent holiday cards to her assistant and never quite remembered her name. She was good at being underestimated. She'd been practicing it her whole life. She met Colton Marsh at a fundraising dinner for a children's hospital when she was 29. He was a family law attorney, third-year partner at a firm with offices in Ottawa and Toronto, the kind of man who wore a good suit the way other men wore jeans. Like it had never occurred to him that there was another option. He was charming in the particular way of men who have always been charming, which meant he did it without thinking, which meant it felt natural, which was the most dangerous kind. He shook her hand and held it 1 second longer than necessary and said, "You're the one who turned the Kapuskasing deal around last year. Everyone in infrastructure knows your name." Nobody ever knew her name. She paid attention after that. They dated for 8 months. Hazel watched him the way she watched balance sheets, looking for the gap between what was reported and what was real. He was generous with compliments and careful with his own feelings. He called when he said he would call. He remembered that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and no milk. When her mother had a health scare in February, he drove to Sudbury with her, without being asked, and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours reading briefs on his laptop, and never once made her feel like an obligation. He passed every test she ran. Not perfectly. He was impatient in traffic, dismissive of films he hadn't chosen, occasionally interrupted her in front of his colleagues, in a way that she logged but did not yet know how to wait. But genuinely enough. Authentically enough. She let herself believe in him. They married when Hazel was 31. Colton's parents hosted the reception at their home in Rockcliffe Park, a stone house with a circular driveway, and a garden that Hazel later learned had its own full-time caretaker. She noted this. She noted that Colton had grown up in that house and still referred to its maintenance costs as negligible. She noted that his mother, Vivienne Marsh, greeted her warmly at the ceremony and spent the reception steering her toward the kitchen whenever photographs were being taken. She filed that too. Part 2. The invisible labor. The first 3 years were, on the surface, fine. Colton worked long hours. Hazel worked longer ones, but never mentioned it, because she had noticed, early on, that Colton received his long hours as a sacrifice worthy of acknowledgement and received hers as background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator, present and expected, and not worth remarking on. She managed the apartment on Somerset, then the house they bought in Westboro, her down payment, her mortgage research, her negotiation with the listing agent on the closing date. Colton signed the papers and told people they had found a great place. She organized the renovation. She sourced the contractor. She managed the timeline while maintaining her own workload, and never once asked Colton to take a day off for a site visit, because she already knew what he would say. He would say he trusted her judgment, which was true, and which was also a very efficient way of ensuring that the burden remained entirely hers, while the credit remained shared. She did not have children of her own, which Vivian Marsh referenced at every family gathering, in the way women like Vivian reference things. Not directly, not accusatorially, but with the particular inflection of a statement shaped like a question. You two are so busy, I suppose it makes sense for now. The pause after for now, doing the work of a paragraph. Colton's younger brother, Reed, and his wife, Annette, had twin boys. Hazel bought their birthday gifts, remembered their allergies, and attended their school concerts while Colton attended work functions. When the twins drew pictures at Christmas, they gave them to their grandmother and to Aunt Hazel, in that order, which was the most honest accounting of the family hierarchy Hazel ever received. She brought it up to Colton twice, the exclusion. The way Vivian planned family weekends and mentioned them after the fact. The way Reed and Annette's vacations appeared in the family group, chat with photos, but never invitations. Colton listened to her the first time with what looked like genuine concern and said he would talk to his mother. He talked to his mother. His mother said Hazel was private and they didn't want to intrude. Colton relayed this as though it resolved something. The second time Hazel raised it, Colton said quietly, without malice, which was somehow worse. My family just shows love differently than yours did, Hazel. You might be reading into things. She did not raise it again. She had grown up in a house where you did not complain about things you could not change. Old habit. She redirected the energy into her work, where effort still produced results, and into the house, which she kept with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything, and into the quiet arithmetic she had been running since childhood, tracking inputs and outputs, contributions and returns, the real ledger underneath the one people agreed to pretend was accurate. Part 3. The Conference. In the third week of October, Colton told her he would be in Ottawa for a conference from Wednesday through Friday. Family law, continuing education, mandatory credits, boring panels, dinner with colleagues Thursday night. He kissed her on the forehead Tuesday morning and said he'd text when he arrived. He texted Wednesday at noon, arrived safe. Panels all day. We'll call tonight. He did not call that night. He texted instead. Long day, exhausted. Talk tomorrow. He did not call Thursday, either. Hazel noticed this the way she noticed everything. Without drama, without confrontation, with the quiet clinical attention of a woman who had spent her whole career identifying the moment when numbers stopped adding up. Friday afternoon, she left work early. Her mother's birthday was Sunday. She needed a gift. She took the 95 bus to the Rideau Center because parking downtown on a Friday was not worth the agony, and because she liked the walk from the bus stop, along the canal when the weather was still holding, which it was, barely. The October light flat and gold, the way it gets in the valley, right before it disappears for 6 months. She took the escalator down to the lower level. She was thinking about what her mother would want. Doris was not a jewelry person. She was a tea person, a puzzle person, a person who would rather have a good pair of slippers than anything wrapped in ribbon. Hazel had been meaning to order something online and had run out of time the way she always ran out of time, quietly, without noticing until it was too late. She was halfway down the escalator when she saw him. Colton Marsh, her husband, in the camel coat she had helped him choose at Holt Renfrew 2 winters ago, standing at the display case in the jewelry store, leaning toward the glass, pointing at something, his hand resting with easy familiarity on the lower back of a woman in a dark green coat who was laughing at something he had said. Hazel did not move. The escalator moved for her. She reached the bottom and stepped off and stood behind a pillar near the food court entrance and watched. The woman in the green coat was perhaps 32, 33. Dark hair cut short. She turned to say something to the sales associate and Hazel saw her profile. A face she did not recognize, which was somehow worse than recognizing it, because it meant this had been happening entirely outside the map of her own life. The associate brought something out from the case. The woman held it up. Colton nodded. He reached for his card. He was in Ottawa. He was at a conference. He was buying jewelry for a woman Hazel had never seen. She stood behind the pillar for 3 minutes. She counted her own breaths the way she had learned to in the years, when money was short, and the ceiling felt low, and she needed to get from one moment to the next without falling apart. She was very good at getting from one moment to the next. She did not take a photograph. She turned and walked back to the escalator and rode it up and left the mall through the Rideau Street entrance and stood on the sidewalk in the October air and called her mother. "Hi, lovey," Dora said. "Everything all right?" "Yes," Hazel said. "I'm just going to be a few minutes late with your gift." "I don't need a gift." "I know," Hazel said. "I'll talk to you Sunday." She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for 60 seconds. Then she called the only number that mattered. Her financial advisor. Her real financial advisor. Not the joint account manager she shared with Colton, but the woman at the private wealth management firm who handled the portfolio Hazel had been quietly building since she was 27. Picked up on the second ring. "Hazel, I wasn't expecting you today. I need to review my independent asset position," Hazel said. "Everything outside the joint accounts. Can we meet Monday morning?" A brief pause. Not surprise. Monica Teal had known Hazel for 9 years and had long since stopped being surprised by her composure. Just recalibration. 8:30, Monica said. "I'll have everything ready." Part 4. The return. Colton came home. Friday evening. Tanned despite the fact that Ottawa in October offered nothing in the way of sun. Relaxed in the particular way of someone who has been somewhere warm and is not thinking about who noticed. He put his bag down in the front hall and opened the refrigerator and said, without turning around, "Traffic on the 417 was brutal. What's for dinner?" "There's leftover soup," Hazel said. She was at the kitchen table. In front of her was her laptop, open to a spreadsheet, and a mug of chamomile that had gone cold. "Good conference?" she said. "Not bad. Same panels every year, honestly. Worthwhile for the credits." "Was the hotel decent?" "Fine. Nothing special." She looked at the back of his head. "Which hotel was it?" "You never said." A pause. "Just one beat." But she had been counting beats for 11 years. "The Westin," he said, "on Colonel By." She typed the name into the spreadsheet with the same neutral expression she brought to all data entry. "That's a nice one," she said. They ate soup. They watched television. Colton fell asleep on the couch at 9:30, and she sat beside him and watched his face in the lamplight and felt something she could not precisely name. Not grief, not rage. Something older and stiller, like bedrock. The thing that is left when everything performative has been stripped away. She went to bed at 11. She did not sleep. She opened her laptop at 1 in the morning and reviewed every joint account, every shared investment, every marital asset she could access. Then she opened a separate window and reviewed everything she had held independently since before their marriage. The portfolio she had never mentioned. The savings account in her name alone. The inheritance from her grandfather that she had never commingled. The annual performance bonuses she had routed to a separate account with a different institution. She had done this not out of distrust. Not exactly. She had done it because she had grown up in a house where the only financial security she had ever seen was what her mother built quietly, independently, without relying on anyone else to maintain it. Old habit. Good habit, as it turned out. She ran the numbers until 3 a.m. Then she closed the laptop and lay in the dark and thought about a woman in a green coat, laughing in a jewelry store, and a man she had trusted for 11 years who had not been anywhere near the Westin on Colonel By Drive. She confirmed this the following Tuesday through a simple phone call to the hotel, posing as a billing inquiry from Colton's firm. The reservation did not exist. She filed that too. Part 5. The folder. What Hazel Drummond did in the 3 weeks that followed was not an act of revenge. She was precise about this in her own mind. It was an act of documentation. Something she had been doing her entire career. Something her industry required of everyone who managed other people's money. You recorded what happened. You established the pattern. You built the file before you needed it, not after. She subcontracted nothing. She asked no one for help she did not already have professional access to. She pulled Colton's firm card statements from their joint account, the card he had added to the account 3 years ago for convenience, and cross-referenced the charges against dates he had claimed to be elsewhere. A dinner for 2 in Gatineau on a night he said he was in Toronto. A boutique hotel in Tremblant on a weekend he was allegedly on a fly fishing trip with colleagues. A florist charge in March, the week before her birthday, on which she had received nothing. 16 months, at minimum, possibly longer. She stopped extending the search when the pattern became undeniable. Because she was not looking for maximum damage. She was looking for a defensible record. She took everything to a family lawyer on a Wednesday afternoon. Not one of Colton's colleagues. A woman named Beatrix at a firm on Elgin Street that specialized in high-net-worth divorce, who reviewed the documents without changing her expression and said, "You've done my job for me." "I work in financial analysis," Hazel said. "It shows," Beatrix said. Part 6. The confrontation. She chose a Thursday evening. The children. There were none, so she did not need to factor in timing around school or bedtime. This was one of the few ways in which the particular shape of their particular grief was logistically simpler. Colton came home at 7. She was at the kitchen table with tea and a folder. He dropped his keys on the counter and said, "Long week. Is there anything in the fridge?" "Sit down for a minute," Hazel said. Something in her voice reached him. He sat. She opened the folder. She did not lead with accusations. She led with documents. The Gatineau dinner, the Tremblant Hotel, the florist, the jewelry store. She laid them out one at a time, the way she had once laid out discrepancy reports for clients, methodically, without editorializing. He looked at the table. "Hazel," he said. "I saw you," she said. 3 weeks ago, at the Rideau Center. I was on the escalator. You were at the jewelry counter with a woman in a dark green coat, and you were buying her something with the joint card." He said nothing. "The conference hotel you mentioned doesn't have a record of your reservation," she said. "I checked. You checked. I check everything, Colton. You know this about me. You have always known this about me." He put his hands flat on the table. He looked like a man watching a building come down, not surprised that buildings could fall, just surprised that this one was his. "It was a mistake," he said. "It was 16 months of mistakes. That's not a mistake. That's a decision you made and remade every day for over a year. It's over. I ended it last month." She looked at him. "I didn't ask." He tried again. He said the things men say in kitchens like this one. That it meant nothing. That he had been under pressure. That he was sorry. That they could fix it. That she deserved better, and he wanted to be the one to give it to her. He said all of it fluently, with the practiced articulation of a man who had spent his career arguing cases he did not fully believe in. Hazel waited until he was finished. "I want a divorce," she said. "Beatrix at Elgin Family Law will be filing the paperwork next week. You'll receive the disclosure notice by Friday." He blinked. "You already have a lawyer." "I've had a lawyer for 2.5 weeks. He looked at the folder. He looked at her face, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition, more like the beginning of it. The first moment a person understands that they have misread every scene in a film they thought they were directing. "Hazel, you can stay in the guest room until we establish interim arrangements. Beatrix will be in touch with your counsel next week." She stood. She picked up her tea. She walked to the stairs. At the bottom step she paused. She turned her head just enough. "You should know," she said, "that I am not the version of me you think you married. I have never been that version. I let you see what was convenient, because I had spent my whole life watching what happens when people know what you're worth before they know who you are. I wanted to be known first." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed for a moment in the dark. Then she opened her laptop and sent 2 emails. Part 7. The structure beneath the divorce, once initiated, revealed what divorces always reveal. That the floor of a shared life is built on someone's labor, and that the person who built it is often the last one people think to account for. Colton's counsel came in confident. Hazel's independent asset disclosures, when they arrived, produced a recalibration. The house in Westboro, down payment traceable to Hazel's premarital savings account. Documented. Contribution to renovation costs. Hazel 93%. Documented. The joint investment account that Colton's counsel planned to split evenly. Funded almost entirely by Hazel's bonuses and capital gains over the course of the marriage. Also documented. Beatrix presented the file with the serene efficiency of someone who had seen this particular look on opposing counsel's face before. The second development was quieter and, to anyone watching from the outside, might have looked unrelated. Through Monica at the wealth management firm, Hazel began restructuring her independent portfolio. One of the assets in her premarital holdings was a limited partnership stake in a mixed-use development in Canada. A position she had taken in her late 20s, on the advice of an infrastructure contact, held quietly, never mentioned, grown substantially in value over the intervening decade. The development was now being expanded. New retail and residential units, The expansion required financing from a consortium of private investors. One of those investors was Colton's firm. Not Colton personally, the real estate division, a side practice he had developed in the last 4 years with 2 other partners, the existence of which Hazel had noted and filed away without comment. The consortium needed a key parcel of land in the northwest corner of the development to proceed. The parcel was held by a numbered company. The numbered company was in Hazel's portfolio. She did not block the sale. She did not accelerate it. She simply did nothing, with extraordinary consistency, while Colton's partners tried and failed to reach the decision-maker through 3 different channels over 6 weeks. She never told him. She did not need to. The point was not punishment. The point was proportion. Colton had spent 11 years moving through a life that Hazel organized, maintained, and in many of its most essential financial elements, funded, without once asking how it worked, without once expressing curiosity about the woman who made it run. He had looked at her budget spreadsheets and called her frugal. He had looked at her work ethic and called her driven, as a compliment that also functioned as a wall, keeping her qualities at arm's length, filed under adjectives rather than understood as a person. She had been invisible by choice. Now her absence was the obstacle he could not move. Part 8. The collapse and the accounting without Hazel. The house in Westboro deteriorated with remarkable speed, not from neglect, exactly, but from the specific entropy that sets in when the person who held everything together is no longer holding. The property manager she had engaged for routine maintenance was under a contract in her name, which she did not renew. The biannual furnace inspection she had scheduled for November was on her calendar, which she no longer shared with Colton. The utility accounts, the internet, the home insurance, all in her name, all requiring her to either transfer or cancel. She transferred what the court required. She canceled the rest with the same mild efficiency she brought to closing out expense reports. Vivian Marsh called once. A careful, formal call. Hazel could hear, underneath the careful formality, the unspoken arithmetic. The family was revising its understanding of what Hazel Drummond had represented, now that Hazel Drummond was no longer available to represent it. "We didn't always make you feel welcomed," Vivian said finally, after a circuitous approach that might have been impressive in a different context. "I want you to know I understand that now." "I appreciate you saying so," Hazel said. She meant it, genuinely, with the same warmth with which she would accept a tax acknowledgement letter. Accurate, well-documented. 12 years too late. Reed called 2 weeks after Vivian. He wanted to know if Hazel might be willing to refer her firm's infrastructure portfolio to the Marsh family's financial planner, given her connections in the sector. She gave him Monica's publicly listed contact information, which was on the firm's website. She did not add anything personal. Colton's partner, Marcus, left the real estate consortium in December. Without the Kanata parcel, the expansion financing collapsed. Colton held his share of a stalled project and a mortgage he had not paid close attention to, because Hazel had managed the payments through a joint account she now controlled with legal oversight. He called her on a Sunday evening in early December. She let it ring 4 times. Hazel. He sounded different. The barrister's precision was still there, technically, but underneath it, something had shifted. The tone of a man who had discovered that he had been arguing a case without reading the disclosure documents. "Colton. The consortium fell through. I think you know that." She looked out the window of her new apartment, a 2-bedroom, on the top floor of a building on the Glebe waterfront, bought outright at possession, with a wire from the trust account Monica managed. Hazel had put a blue rug in the living room and a second-hand armchair. She had reupholstered herself over 2 weekends, and nothing about the space looked like money. It looked, for the first time in years, like her. "Marcus mentioned a land issue," she said. "The numbered company holding the northwest parcel," Colton said. "I've been trying to reach them for 2 months. My assistant finally traced the corporate structure last week." He paused. She let the pause exist. "It's your company," he said. "It's one of several," she said. "I've held that position since I was 28. Silence on the line. "You've been running a 7-figure portfolio our entire marriage," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have been running it since before our marriage," she said. "I disclosed it in the asset statement. Your counsel had every document. I didn't. I wasn't aware. You weren't curious," she said. "That is a different thing." She heard him breathing. "Hazel, if I had known." "You had 11 years to know," she said. "You had 11 years to ask me about my work, about my finances, about what I had built before we met and what I was continuing to build. You knew I worked in private equity asset management. You knew I was good at my job. You never asked what that looked like in practice. You were not interested in me as a financial entity, Colton. You were interested in the version of me that kept the house running and attended the family dinners and made your life comfortable while you focused on yours. A long pause. The parcel, he said finally, his voice quieter. Is there any possibility? I will sell the parcel at fair market value through an open process, she said. Monica manages all transactions. If your reconstituted group can meet the terms, you're welcome to submit. I won't offer a discount. I won't offer a private arrangement, and I won't take a call about it. She paused. What I will tell you, she said, is what I should have said in the kitchen 3 months ago. I hid what I was not because I was ashamed of it. I hid what I was because I wanted once in my life to be chosen for who I was before anyone knew what I had. I wanted the choosing to be real. I found out eventually that I was not being chosen at all. I was being used efficiently, pleasantly without malice, but used. Her voice remained even. She had spent years moderating her tone for other people's comfort. She was done doing that. That is the answer to the question you never thought to ask. She ended the call. She set the phone on the kitchen counter and made a pot of tea and stood at the window while the kettle boiled, watching the Rideau River go dark in the December evening. The ice just starting at the edges, the center still moving. The way rivers in this part of the country hold out until the cold finally wins. Part 9. The ground. By February, Hazel had settled into her life with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has always known how to build something from the bottom up. She had been offered a promotion at the firm in November, vice president, infrastructure and private markets, which she accepted and which came with a profile in a trade publication, 3 photographs, and a short paragraph about her work on the Northern Ontario portfolio over the past decade. It did not mention her marriage. It mentioned her Laurentian degree. It mentioned her mother. Doris had sent the article link to her church group. This was the proudest Hazel had ever seen her mother be about anything. And she understood, in a way she had not quite understood before, that her mother had always known what she was worth, had always been waiting for someone else to figure it out. She had her mother over for dinner on a Thursday in March. The blue rug, the reupholstered armchair, the good soup, actual good soup, not the survival soup of her childhood, but the version she had made on Sunday afternoons when she had time and quiet, and no one else's needs to organize around first. Doris sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the bowl and said, "This apartment feels like you." "It does," Hazel said. "The house didn't." "No," Hazel said. "It didn't." They ate in the comfortable silence of 2 women who have always understood each other and have not always needed to say so. The Kanata parcel sold in April to a development consortium that met the terms Monica set. Colton's reconstituted group was one of 3 bidders. They did not win. Hazel reviewed the final transaction summary on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 other meetings and initialed the approval and moved on. Part 10. The view from here. On a Friday evening in late April, Hazel Drummond sat on the small balcony of her apartment and watched the river from her armchair, which she had carried out herself, and which was slightly too wide for the door, but had made it through, eventually, because she was patient with things that required patience. The ice had been gone since March. The water was high and fast, and carrying the snowmelt from somewhere north of here, the way rivers in this part of Ontario always did in spring, indifferent to the drama of the winter they were washing away. She had a glass of white wine. She had a book she was not reading. She had a phone with 4 unread messages that would wait until tomorrow. She thought about the escalator, not about Colton. She had thought about Colton enough, had examined that particular grief from every angle it deserved and filed it in the closed column. She thought about the escalator itself, the specific mechanical indifference of it, carrying her down toward a thing she had not chosen to see, not slowing for her, not offering her a way to brace. And what she had done was not cry, not freeze, not press herself against the handrail and try to become invisible. She had stepped off at the bottom, walked behind a pillar, and watched with clear eyes until she understood what she was looking at. And then she had called the right person. That was, she thought, the truest version of herself. Not the woman who kept the house, not the wife at the family dinners, not the budget-conscious analyst who clipped coupons as a discipline rather than a necessity, but this. The woman who, when faced with something real and terrible, became very still and very clear and made the right call. She had spent 11 years being careful about what she showed. She had been careful because she had learned, early, that the people who want something from you find a reason to leave once they have it. And the people who want nothing from you are the only ones whose love is actually legible. What she had not accounted for, what the experiment had failed to predict, was the possibility that a person could want nothing from you and still not see you. That invisibility, even chosen invisibility, even strategic invisibility, still cost you something, still made you smaller than you were, still left you eating alone at a table you had built and built and built while someone else received credit for the view. She was not invisible anymore. Her name was on the VP announcement on the firm's website. Her name was on the offer letter Monica had sent on her behalf to the Canada Consortium. Her name was on the lease of an apartment that felt, for the first time in over a decade, like somewhere she actually lived. She picked up her wine. The river moved the way rivers move, not caring about the winter, not celebrating the spring, simply going where it was always going, in the direction it had always been heading, patient and certain and absolutely itself. Some women fall apart in the produce section of a grocery store 6 months later. Some women fall apart in the car. Some women hold it together so long that the holding together becomes its own kind of falling apart. Slow and structural. The kind you don't notice until you're standing in a mall, watching your husband buy jewelry for someone else. And the only thing you feel is the arithmetic clicking into place. Hazel had held it together. And then she had done something harder than falling apart. She had built something better instead.